There are certain teachings that do not try to guide us step by step, but instead invite us to look at life from a completely different standpoint, where what we have always taken for granted begins to loosen its hold and something deeper quietly comes into view. One such teaching comes from a text known as the Ribhu Gita, which remains far less discussed when compared to many other well-known scriptures, not because it lacks importance, but because of the very nature of what it expresses. The Ribhu Gita is a sacred Hindu text focusing on non-dualistic Advaita Vedanta, affirming that only Brahman, the Absolute, exists, and the individual self is identical to it. It is part of the Shiva Rahasya Purana, documenting teachings from Lord Shiva to sage Ribhu, who then taught his disciple Nadaga, focusing on self-realization. Most spiritual teachings speak in a way that prepares the mind gradually, offering practices, disciplines, and clear steps so that a seeker feels there is a path to follow and a destination to reach. And this feels natural because it matches the way we approach everything else in life. However, the Ribhu Gita does not follow this approach because it does not begin with what we experience as individuals, but with what it considers to be ultimately true. And in doing so, it removes the usual support that the mind depends on. This is also why it is not widely discussed, because what it says does not easily fit into the idea of progress, and it does not give the mind something definite to hold on to or achieve. At the heart of its teaching lies a statement that appears simple, yet carries immense depth, where it says that one should be firm in the understanding that there are no charitable acts, no sacred places, no gain or loss, no doer and no receiver, no karma, no devotion, no knowledge, and no knower or known, and that all of these are only thought forms which arise and dissolve within the Brahman self, which alone remains. When this is heard, it can feel as though everything that we consider meaningful is being set aside, because our daily life is built upon action, intention, effort, and result, where we feel that we must do something in order to become something. Yet the teaching is not dismissing life, but asking us to look at it more carefully, because it draws attention to the way in which we understand our experience, rather than the experience itself. If one observes even a simple day, it becomes clear that everything we move through is constantly changing, where thoughts arise and pass, emotions shift, actions begin and end, and situations never remain the same for long. Even the sense of who we are keeps changing depending on the situation, where at one moment we feel confident, at another uncertain, at one moment peaceful, at another disturbed. And through all this movement, nothing seems to remain fixed. At the same time, there is something that remains present through all these changes, which is the simple fact that we are aware of what is happening. This awareness is present when thoughts arise and when they pass. It is present when emotions move and when they settle. And it is present whether the mind is clear or confused. The Ribhu Gita points towards this awareness as the self, and it says that everything else, including the sense of being a doer, the idea of action and result, and even the path of seeking, are appearances within this awareness. Because these arise within the mind, and the mind itself is something that comes and goes, they do not have an independent existence of their own. To make this clearer, one can look at a simple example from daily life. When you watch a dream, everything within the dream appears real while it is happening, where there are people, actions, emotions, and events. And yet when you wake up, it becomes clear that all of it existed only within your own awareness. The Ribhu Gita invites us to look at our waking experience in a similar way, not by denying it, but by recognizing that everything we take to be solid and separate is appearing within a deeper presence that remains unchanged. When this is seen, even in a small way, the way we relate to life begins to shift, because the constant pressure to achieve something in order to feel complete begins to reduce. This is why the teaching says there is no gain and no loss, because what we truly are is not something that is acquired through effort or diminished through experience. Even ideas such as devotion, knowledge, and practice are included within this understanding because they belong to the process of seeking, and while they may guide a person at a certain stage, they do not define what is ultimately true. This is not a teaching that asks us to stop acting or to withdraw from life, but it invites us to see clearly what is real and what is only a passing appearance within our experience. For a seeker, this can bring a quiet shift because the search that was always directed outward or into the future begins to turn inward towards what is already present. The mind may still move, questions may still arise, and life may continue in the same way on the surface, but there is a subtle change within, where one is no longer completely carried away by every movement. The significance of the Ribhu Gita lies in this directness because it does not keep the seeker engaged in endless concepts, but gently points towards a recognition that is immediate and always available. It reminds us that what we are looking for is not something that lies somewhere else or at some later time, but what is already present as the very basis of our experience. This is why it is both simple and difficult at the same time, because it does not give the mind a journey, but asks it to see what is already here. When this begins to be understood, even in a small measure, there is a sense of ease that arises, not because life becomes perfect, but because the need to constantly become something begins to lose its hold. And in that ease, the movement of seeking starts to settle, because what was being searched for was never absent, but only overlooked due to the way in which we have learned to see.